The cart wobbled every time Emma pushed it down the hallway. It always did that. The left wheel had been broken for 3 months, and she'd reported it twice, but nobody had fixed it. That was fine. Emma was used to things not getting fixed. She simply adjusted, tilted the cart slightly to the right, kept moving, kept her head down, kept smiling. That was Emma's whole system. Tilt, move, smile. She was 26, heavy-set in a way that made the hotel uniform pull tight at the shoulders, and she had the kind of face people trusted immediately. Wide brown eyes, a small gap between her front teeth, cheeks that rounded when she smiled. She wasn't pretty in the way that stopped traffic, but she was warm. The kind of warm that made guests say thank you, like they actually meant it. Suite 1408 was the last stop on her afternoon round. She knocked twice, waited, knocked again. No answer. Standard. She used her keycard, eased the door open, and stepped into a room that smelled like expensive cologne and cigarette smoke, even though smoking was strictly forbidden on the 14th floor. The curtains were half drawn. Grey afternoon light cut across the carpet in long strips. Emma set the coffee tray on the side table and began straightening the room quickly. Pillow here, newspaper folded there, towel aligned at the edge of the bathroom shelf. She worked fast. She always worked fast in the suites. She was reaching for the second pillow when she heard the door open. She turned, and her breath caught. The man who walked in was not what she expected. She didn't know exactly what she'd expected. She hadn't looked at the guest register. But it wasn't this. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark charcoal suit that looked like it cost more than her monthly salary. His jaw was sharp. His eyes were the kind of grey that didn't look warm in any light. He was probably 35, maybe 38, and he moved through the room like he owned it. Not because he was arrogant, but because he simply did not consider the possibility that he didn't. Behind him, 2 men in black stopped at the door without being told to. They didn't come in. They just stood there like furniture. Emma gave her standard smile. "Good afternoon, sir. I'll be out of your way in just a moment. I was freshening up the room. Your coffee is on the table." The man looked at her, nodded once, and moved toward the window. He pulled back the curtain and stood there, looking out at the city below. Emma went back to the pillows. She was almost done when she moved to collect the empty water glasses from the bedside table. That's when she saw it. His jacket sleeve had written up slightly as he raised his arm. Just an inch, maybe 2, but it was enough. On his inner wrist, dark ink, slightly faded at the edges, the design unmistakable, was a phoenix. Wings spread mid-flight, the tail feathers curling into a small flame at the base. Fine, deliberate lines. Emma stopped. She didn't mean to. Her hand just stopped, hovering over the glass. Her eyes stuck on the tattoo like a nail catching cloth. Because she had seen that exact tattoo before. Not something similar, not the same general idea. The exact same image, in the exact same place, with the exact same curl at the tail feathers. On her mother's wrist. Her mother, who worked at a small bakery. Her mother, who never talked about her past. Her mother, who changed the subject every single time Emma asked about her life before Emma was born. Her mother, Sarah, who had that tattoo for as long as Emma could remember and had only ever said, "It's old. It doesn't matter." Emma heard herself speak before she made the decision to. "My mother has the exact same tattoo." It came out quiet, not accusatory, almost wondering, like she was thinking aloud. The room went completely still. The man at the window did not turn immediately. He stayed with his back to her for exactly 3 seconds, Emma counted, because the silence stretched like a held breath. And then he turned. His gray eyes moved to her face, then to the wrist she was unconsciously gesturing toward, then back to her face. Something shifted in his expression. It wasn't anger. It wasn't suspicion. It was something Emma couldn't name, something between shock and calculation, moving too fast beneath a very controlled surface. "Your mother," he repeated. His voice was low, calm, dangerously calm. "Yes." Emma straightened, suddenly aware she might have made an enormous mistake. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said anything. It's none of my—" "What's her name?" The question was quiet, polite even, but there was a weight behind it that made Emma's chest feel tight. "Sarah," Emma said before she could think twice. "Sarah Dawson." The man looked at her for a long moment. Nothing moved in his face. Then he turned back to the window. "Thank you for the coffee," he said. Emma gathered her cart and left. She didn't realize until she was back in the elevator, staring at her own reflection in the metal door, that her hands were trembling, and she had no idea why. Behind her, in suite 1408, Adrian Moretti stood very still at the window. His phone was already in his hand. He wasn't calling his lawyer. He wasn't calling his business partners. He was calling the one person he trusted when something mattered. "Find out everything about a woman named Sarah Dawson," he said. "She lives in this city. She has a phoenix tattoo on her left wrist. Do it quietly, and do it fast." He ended the call and looked down at his own wrist. The phoenix stared back at him. Only 8 people in the world had ever been given this mark. 7 of them were blood family. The 8th had been described in his father's own words as the woman who saved us all, a woman who had vanished without a trace before Adrian was old enough to remember her face. His father had searched for her for 20 years. He had died still searching. And her daughter had just brought him coffee. Emma told herself it meant nothing. By the time she finished her shift and changed out of her uniform, she had almost convinced herself of it. Lots of people had phoenix tattoos. It was a popular design. Her mother's was probably just a coincidence, something she'd gotten done at a parlor years ago, the same way thousands of people did. That's what Emma told herself on the bus ride home. She stopped believing it the moment she walked through the front door. Her mother was standing at the kitchen counter, rolling dough for tomorrow's bread, the way she did every evening. The radio was on low. The apartment smelled like flour and cardamom. Everything was exactly as it always was. And yet the moment Sarah looked up and saw Emma's face, her hands went still. "What happened?" Sarah asked. Emma had planned to ease into it, ask casually, maybe not even bring it up tonight. Instead, she said, "I served coffee to a man today. He had your tattoo. The exact same one, Mama. Same phoenix, same wrist, same everything." The rolling pin stopped moving. Sarah's face did something Emma had never seen it do before. It went completely blank, not calm, not confused, but erased, like a curtain dropping fast over a window. In 26 years, Emma had seen her mother cry at commercials, laugh until she couldn't breathe, and get furious over bad service at restaurants. She had never once seen her mother's face go blank. "You're imagining things," Sarah said. She turned back to the dough. "I'm not. Mama, look at me." Sarah didn't look. "Who is he?" Emma asked. "Because he's not nobody. He had 2 men standing outside his door. He's staying in the most expensive suite in the hotel. And when I mentioned your tattoo, he—" "Emma." Sarah's voice was quiet but firm in a way that meant stop. "Drop it." "I can't drop it. You've had that tattoo my whole life, and you've never explained it."
"You always say it's old, it doesn't matter.
but it clearly matters because right now you look terrified.
I'm not terrified, I'm tired.
Mama.
I said drop it.
Sarah finally turned, and her eyes were hard in a way that frightened Emma more than the blankness had.
There are things in my life that happened before you were born that are none of your business. I kept them away from you on purpose. Don't go pulling at threads you don't understand.
Emma stared at her for a long moment. Then she nodded once, went to her room, and quietly closed the door. She didn't sleep well that night. Adrian arrived the next morning without warning. Emma was at work when her phone buzzed, her neighbor sending a photograph with the message, "There's a man outside your building asking for your mother. No bodyguards this time. Looks serious." Emma's stomach dropped. She asked her supervisor for an early break, got on the bus, and arrived to find Adrian Moretti standing outside her mother's bakery 3 blocks from home. Alone, just as promised, hands in his coat pockets, looking almost ordinary except for the fact that he looked like nothing in the world could move him unless he decided to move. He saw Emma before she reached him. He waited.
You didn't have to come yourself,
Emma said. I wanted to, he said simply. Emma looked at the bakery window. She could see her mother inside, arranging trays. Sarah hadn't noticed them yet.
She won't talk to you,
Emma said.
I already tried.
I know. He didn't look deterred. I'd still like to try. They went in together. The bell above the door chimed. Sarah looked up from behind the counter with her customer smile already in place, and then she saw Adrian's face. The smile fell. Her eyes dropped immediately to his wrist, where the cuff of his jacket sat. She couldn't see the tattoo from where she stood, but something in his face was enough. Her hand moved, just slightly, to the edge of the counter, like she needed to hold on to something. Adrian stepped forward. He didn't rush. He gave her space the way you give space to something fragile. My name is Adrian Moretti, he said quietly. My father was Roberto Moretti. I think you knew him. The bakery was small and warm and smelled like fresh bread. A love song played faintly from the back. 2 customers sat at the corner table, unbothered. Sarah said nothing for a very long time. Then, some promises are safer when they stay buried. I'm not here to dig anything up, Adrian said. I just want to understand. You can't understand, Sarah said. Her voice was steady, but her knuckles were white on the counter. And if you're smart, if your father raised you to be smart, you'll walk out that door and forget my daughter ever said a word to you. Adrian held her gaze. My father spent 20 years looking for you. Something cracked in Sarah's expression, just for a second. A flash of something, grief or guilt or both, and then it was gone. Then he wasted 20 years, she said. Go home, Mr. Moretti. She turned and disappeared into the back. Adrian stood there for a moment. Then he looked at Emma, who had watched the entire exchange with her heart hammering somewhere in her throat. She's scared, he said softly, not with frustration, almost with understanding. Of what? Emma whispered. Before he could answer, she noticed it, tucked beneath the bread display, pushed toward Emma's side of the counter in the few seconds her mother had stood there. An old brass key, small, sitting on top of a folded cloth napkin. Emma picked it up without thinking. Adrian looked at it, then at her. Neither of them spoke, but they both knew this wasn't Sarah shutting the door. This was Sarah, in the only way she knew how, quietly opening one. The key was old. Emma turned it over in her palm on the bus ride back to the hotel, Adrian sitting beside her, which was strange in itself. A man like him on a public bus, no bodyguards, no black car. But he'd simply followed her on, paid his fare, and sat down like it was the most natural thing in the world. Do you know what it opens? He asked. No, Emma said. She's never shown me anything like this. She closed her fingers around it. The metal was warm from her palm now, but had started cold. The kind of cold that meant it had been sitting somewhere dark for a very long time. Adrian looked straight ahead. My father's name was Roberto Moretti. He built everything our family has from nothing. Legitimate businesses, real estate, Some things less legitimate that I won't pretend didn't exist. He paused. When I was 4 years old, someone tried to finish both my parents. A planned hit, carried out at a countryside estate 2 hours from the city. My mother was pregnant with my younger brother. Emma watched his profile. He spoke the way people spoke about things they had processed 1,000 times. Not coldly, but carefully. They survived, he continued. My father never fully explained how. He only ever said that a young woman helped them escape through underground passages beneath the property. A stranger. She refused money. She refused to give her name. She disappeared the same night. He turned to look at Emma. He gave her the phoenix tattoo as the only way he thought he'd ever be able to recognize her again, if he ever found her. He had it done while she slept, on the wrist she'd offered him to shake hands on a promise. Emma stared at him. She let him tattoo her while she was sleeping. She didn't know until morning. By then she was already gone. He looked down at his own wrist. He said she laughed when she found out, left him a note that said, I preferred roses, but this will do. Emma felt something tighten in her chest. That sounded exactly like her mother. The Moretti estate was 40 minutes outside the city, and Adrian's car, which appeared, somehow, exactly when they stepped off the bus, drove them there in silence that wasn't uncomfortable. The house was large without being cruel about it. Stone walls, old ivy, windows that caught the late afternoon light and threw it back gold. Inside, it smelled like wood polish and history. Adrian led her straight to the library. It was floor-to-ceiling shelves, the kind Emma had only seen in films, with a rolling ladder on a brass rail and a reading table in the center, scarred by decades of use. Adrian went immediately to the far corner, to a shelf that held no books, only boxes, framed photographs, and a few objects wrapped in cloth. He stopped in front of an elderly woman sitting in a high-backed chair by the window, a blanket across her knees despite the warmth. Emma hadn't noticed her. Nonna, Adrian said gently, crouching to her level. I need the diary. The old woman looked at Emma first. Sharp eyes, still quick, set in a face that had once been very beautiful and was now the kind of face that had earned every line. She studied Emma for a long moment, unhurried, thorough, and then she nodded once, as if Emma had passed some test she hadn't known she was taking. Top shelf, she said. Behind the green ledger. Your father hid it there because he knew I'd never climb that ladder. Adrian retrieved it, leather-bound, dark brown, the cover swollen slightly with age. He brought it to the reading table and opened it carefully, the spine crackling like something waking up. He turned pages slowly. Emma stood beside him, close enough to read. The handwriting was large and slanted, ink pressed hard into the page, the writing of a man who felt things deeply and pushed that feeling through his pen. Adrian stopped at a page near the middle. The entry was dated 28 years ago, 3 weeks after the night of the attempt. Emma leaned in and read the lines Adrian pointed to. I have searched for her again. Nothing. She is a ghost who saved my family and asked for nothing. If God is just, He will put her in the path of someone who carries my name.
And if that day comes, if you are reading this and you have found her, or found someone who belongs to her, then you already know what to do. Protect her family as you would protect your own. This is not a request. It is the only debt I was never able to repay. Emma read it twice. The library was very quiet. Outside, wind moved through the old trees. There's more, Adrian said. He turned to a page near the back, a single line underlined twice. The chapel. Everything real is kept at the chapel. Emma looked up. What chapel? Adrian's grandmother spoke from her chair, her voice dry but certain. There is an old countryside chapel on the edge of the original Moretti land. Nobody has been inside it for 20 years. Your father locked it after your mother died, she added, looking at Adrian, and said the memories inside it were too heavy to carry and too important to throw away. Adrian closed the diary slowly. He looked at Emma.
"I think," he said, "we need to go there." Emma nodded, but even as she did, something nagged at her, a small, quiet thought she couldn't shake loose. Her mother had practically pushed that key across the counter. She already knew where it led. The chapel looked like it had been forgotten by time and was grateful for it. It sat at the edge of a field that had stopped being tended years ago, surrounded by grass that came up to Emma's knees and trees that had grown inward over the decades until their branches formed a loose, tangled roof above the path. The stone walls were dark with moss. One of the narrow windows had cracked clean across, and someone, long ago, had stuffed the gap with cloth that had since turned grey and stiff. Adrian's grandmother had insisted on coming. She sat in the front seat of the car with her handbag in her lap and said nothing the entire drive. But when they arrived and Adrian moved to help her out, she waved him off with the particular impatience of someone who had survived too much to be treated as delicate. Emma liked her enormously. Adrian's bodyguard, a quiet, solid man named Gio, who Emma had noticed never stood too close and never stood too far, stayed near the car without being asked. He was the kind of man who understood instinctively where he was needed. Adrian tried the chapel door first. Locked. Old iron handle, old iron lock. Emma already had the key out. It fit perfectly. The lock turned with a resistance that gave way slowly, like something exhaling after holding its breath for 20 years. The door swung inward, and cold air moved past them. Not the cold of emptiness, but the cold of a place that had been sealed, preserved. Inside, the chapel was small and plain. 6 wooden pews, 3 on each side. An altar at the far end with a cloth so faded its original color was anyone's guess. Dust lay over everything in a thin, even film, the way dust settles when nothing has disturbed it for a very long time. Adrian's grandmother stepped in slowly, looked around, and pressed her lips together in the careful way of someone managing emotion. "Roberto used to bring your mother here," she said quietly. Not to Adrian specifically, to the room. Before they were married. He said the quiet helped him think. Adrian moved down the center aisle, looking at the floor. Emma watched him. The way his eyes tracked the stones, methodical, searching. He crouched at different points, pressing his hand flat against the floor. Emma moved to the other side and did the same. She found it 3 pews from the back, on the left side. One stone that didn't sit flush with the rest. A barely visible gap at one edge, as though whatever had once sealed it had dried and shrunk over decades. Emma pressed her palm against the near edge and felt it move, just slightly, but enough. "Here," she said. Adrian was beside her in seconds. Together, they worked the stone up and to the side. It was heavier than it looked, and Emma's arms shook with the effort, but she didn't step back. It came free with a grinding sound that echoed in the small space. Beneath it was a hollow, and inside the hollow, wrapped carefully in oilcloth that had kept it dry and intact, was an iron box about the size of a large book. Emma recognized the implications of that oilcloth immediately. Whoever had put this here had expected it to stay for a long time. This wasn't hidden in haste. This was hidden with intention. Adrian lifted the box out. He set it on the nearest pew. There was a small latch, but no lock. He opened it. Inside, 3 photographs, a folded stack of letters tied with kitchen string, and a newspaper clipping that had yellowed at the edges but remained fully legible. Adrian picked up the newspaper clipping first. The headline was in a language Emma didn't speak, but she could read the date. 28 years ago, 2 weeks after the night Roberto Moretti had written about in his diary. Below the headline was a photograph of a collapsed entrance to what looked like underground tunnels, and 3 lines had been circled in ink by someone's careful hand. Adrian translated quietly. A network of underground passages running beneath the old Moretti estate was discovered collapsed. The passages are believed to have been used during the attempted attack on the family. The assailants were found trapped inside. No outside accomplice was ever identified. Emma felt the air shift in the room. "She led them in," Emma said slowly. "My mother led the attackers into the passages." "And collapsed them," Adrian finished. He looked at the clipping for a long moment. "She didn't just help my parents escape. She trapped the men who came to finish them and buried the entrance." He set the clipping down carefully. She was 22 years old. Emma's grandmother made a soft sound from the pew where she'd sat down. She was holding one of the photographs, old, slightly blurred, of a young woman standing at the edge of a field, laughing at something off camera. She held it out to Emma without a word. Emma took it. The young woman in the photograph had Emma's exact eyes, the same wide set, the same slight downward tilt at the outer corners. Emma's throat closed. "She never told me," Emma whispered. "Not one word. My whole life." Adrian looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, his expression held no calculation, no control, just something quiet and human. "She didn't hide it because she was ashamed," he said. "She hid it to keep you safe." Emma looked at her mother's young face in the photograph, and for the first time, she began to understand the true weight of a silence kept for 28 years. Emma didn't tell her mother they'd found the box. Not that night. She sat through dinner across from Sarah, watching her portion out rice and pour water and ask about Emma's day at the hotel, and she said nothing. Because she needed to look at her mother first, really look, before she said a word. Sarah Dawson was 53 years old. She was small and slightly rounded in the way of women who spent their lives on their feet, with gray threading through her dark hair that she never bothered to color. Her hands were flower rough and capable. She laughed easily and cried at funerals even for people she barely knew, and made bread like it was a spiritual practice. She was the most ordinary, extraordinary person Emma had ever known, and she had collapsed a tunnel on 4 armed men at 22 years old, walked away without telling a single soul, and then spent the next 28 years making sure nobody ever found out. Emma went to bed and stared at the ceiling for a long time. She drove to the lakeside cottage the following morning. Her mother owned it, barely. It was a small, slightly leaning thing at the edge of a narrow lake 40 minutes from the city, bought cheap decades ago when cheap was the only option available. Sarah went there on her days off to sit by the water and read. She said it helped her breathe.
Emma had always thought that was a sweet, simple thing to say. Now she wondered how much breathing her mother had needed over the years, and why. She found Sarah on the small wooden dock, feet bare, a cup of tea going cold beside her. The lake was still and gray-green, the morning light thin and flat. Sarah heard Emma's footsteps on the dock planks and turned, and whatever she saw in Emma's face made her set the tea down very slowly. "You went to the chapel," Sarah said. It wasn't a question. Emma sat down beside her. For a moment, they were both quiet, looking at the water. "The key opened it," Emma said. "We found the box." Sarah nodded, just once, like she'd known this was coming and had simply been waiting for it to arrive. "We," she repeated softly. "You went with him?" "Yes." Another silence. A bird moved low over the water and was gone. "Mama," Emma turned to face her. "Tell me, please, all of it. I'm not a child anymore, and I think you've been carrying this alone for long enough." Sarah looked at the lake for another moment. Then she exhaled, a long, slow breath, the kind that releases something that has been held too tightly for too long. And she began. She had been 22, working as a kitchen helper at the Moretti countryside estate, not family staff, just seasonal. She hadn't even known who the Morettis were, not really. She knew the name meant money, and that the house was large, and that the man who owned it was serious, and his wife was kind and heavily pregnant. The night it happened, she had been the last one in the kitchen. She heard the vehicles first, too many, too quiet,
arriving with their lights off. She looked out the window and understood immediately that whatever was happening was not good. She found Roberto and his wife, Elena, in the east corridor. Elena was barely able to move. Roberto had a cut above his eye and was trying to do 3 things at once: protect his wife, find a phone, and locate an exit, and failing at all 3. Sarah had grown up in that region. She knew those grounds better than most of the permanent staff because she had spent summers there as a girl, playing in the fields. She knew about the underground passages because an old caretaker had shown them to her years before, told her they ran beneath the entire estate, old smuggling routes from another century. She didn't think. She simply moved. She got Roberto and Elena into the passages through an entrance behind the wine cellar, told Roberto to keep moving north, keep counting his steps, exit at 300. Then she went back. Emma stared at her. "You went back?" "Someone had to make sure they didn't find the entrance," Sarah said simply. She had led the men in, 4 of them, following what they thought was the family fleeing through the tunnels. And then she had pulled the iron lever that the old caretaker had shown her, the one that controlled the support beams, and she had walked out the north exit at exactly 300 steps, while the entrance collapsed behind her. She waited in the dark until she heard Roberto and Elena emerge safely. Roberto had turned to thank her, had asked for her name, had tried to press money into her hands. She had refused all of it. "Why?" Emma whispered. "Why refuse everything?" Sarah finally turned to look at her daughter. Her eyes were dry, but very deep. "Because I didn't do it for him," she said quietly. "I did it for her, for Elena. Because she was pregnant and terrified, and she looked at me like I was the only solid thing in the room." She paused. "You can't put a price on that." Emma felt tears arrive without permission. "And then," Sarah continued, "I found out that the men who'd organized the attack were still looking for anyone connected to that night, anyone who could testify, anyone who knew anything." She looked at Emma steadily. "I was pregnant with you." The world went very still. "I changed our surname," Sarah said. "I moved cities. I built a small life, and I kept it small on purpose, because small lives don't attract dangerous attention." She reached over and took Emma's hand. "Everything I buried for you." Emma couldn't speak. Her mother squeezed her hand once, firm and sure. "I would do it again," Sarah said. "Every single day." Emma told Adrian that evening. She called him from the car park outside the cottage, still sitting in the driver's seat, the lake invisible now in the dark, but somehow still present, a weight of water and quiet just beyond the tree line. She told him everything her mother had said. She kept her voice steady until the part about Sarah being pregnant, and then her voice did something she hadn't prepared for. It simply stopped working for a moment, like a signal dropping mid-transmission. Adrian waited. He didn't fill the silence with words, which Emma was grateful for. When she finished, he said, "She was protecting you before you were even born." "Yes," Emma said. A pause. "There's still something missing," he said. "The diary mentioned a second letter. My father wrote that the letter explained everything, why he trusted her so completely, why the phoenix mark meant what it meant. But the letter wasn't in the box." Emma frowned. Could it have been lost? "My father didn't lose things," Adrian said, and the certainty in his voice wasn't arrogance. It was the simple conviction of a man who had known his father well. "He placed things, deliberately. We just haven't found where." The antique bookshop was mentioned in a footnote. Emma had almost missed it entirely. A single line on the back of one of the letters from the iron box, in handwriting that wasn't Roberto's. Smaller, neater, written in the margin like an afterthought. Libreria Antico. She knew the owner. Adrian identified it immediately. A small antiquarian bookshop in the old quarter of the city, the kind of place that had survived 50 years of urban development through sheer stubbornness and a loyal clientele of people who believed the smell of old paper was its own reward. They went the next morning, Emma and Adrian, without Gio, without ceremony. The shop was narrow and deep, the kind that appeared small from the street, but unfolded inside into a labyrinth of shelves and stacked volumes and framed maps pinned crooked on every available wall. It smelled magnificently of dust and binding glue and something faintly like cedar. The owner was a man of about 75, small and precise, with glasses on a chain and the alert, measuring eyes of someone who had spent a lifetime deciding which things had value and which only appeared to. He looked at them when they entered. Then he looked at Adrian's wrist. He said nothing for a moment. Then, "I wondered when someone would come." Emma felt the hairs rise on the back of her neck. His name was Enzo. He had known Roberto Moretti for 30 years. He had known Sarah, not well, but enough. She had visited the shop once, almost 3 years after the night at the estate, asking Enzo to hold something for her. Enzo said she had looked healthy but watchful, the way people look when they have learned to always check behind them. "She left an envelope," Enzo said. "She told me to give it to whoever came asking about the phoenix. She said if nobody ever came, I should burn it when I died." He allowed himself a small, dry smile. "I am glad someone came before that became necessary." He disappeared into the back for several minutes. Emma and Adrian stood among the shelves, not speaking. Emma pulled a book spine out without reading it and pushed it back. "You're nervous," Adrian said. "Aren't you?" "Yes," he said, which surprised her. Enzo returned with a small envelope, brown with age, sealed with wax that had been pressed with a thumbprint instead of a stamp. Adrian turned it over. On the front, in Sarah's handwriting, younger, less certain than the hand Emma knew now, but recognizable, were 4 words. "For Roberto."
Or after. Adrian broke the seal carefully. He read it, standing there between the shelves, and Emma watched his face the way she had learned to over the past several days, looking for the small shifts beneath the surface, the tells that his controlled expression almost never allowed. She saw it happen. Something in his jaw tightened and then released. His eyes moved to the bottom of the page and stayed there for a moment before he looked up. "She refused the money twice," he said. Emma blinked. "Twice?" He held the letter out. Emma read it. The letter was short, barely a page. Sarah had written it simply, without decoration. She explained that 3 months after the night at the estate, Roberto had found her, not to threaten or to pressure, to thank her. He had brought money, a significant amount, a life-changing amount for a 22-year-old with nothing. She had refused. He had asked why. She had written his answer down exactly as she'd given it to him that day. "Because you have a coming into the world who will need to believe that some people do good things simply because they are good things to do. If I take the money, I become someone who did this for a reward. I would rather your child grows up knowing that a stranger once helped your family for no reason other than that it was right. Keep your money. Tell your child that story instead." Adrian stood very still. Emma looked up from the letter and realized, with a lurch, that this wasn't just a story about her mother anymore. "She said that knowing about me," Emma said quietly. "She said it for you," Adrian replied. But Emma was already thinking about something else, something that had snagged in her mind like cloth on a nail. "Adrian," she looked at him, "if your father found her 3 months later, he knew where she was. He knew her face. He could have found her again any time. So why did he spend 20 years searching?" The silence that followed was different from all the other silences. Adrian looked at the letter.
then at Emma, and she could see it in his face, the same realization arriving. "Because she moved," he said slowly. "Right after that visit, she moved and changed her name." He paused. "Which means she wasn't hiding from his enemies." Emma finished the thought. "She was hiding from his gratitude." The charity gala was Adrian's idea. Not because he wanted a party. Adrian Moretti did not throw parties for enjoyment. He threw them because controlled environments with witnesses were occasionally more useful than private meetings, and because certain conversations were best conducted in rooms where nobody could raise their voice without embarrassing themselves. He had a reason for this one. 3 days after the bookshop, a lawyer Emma had never heard of sent a formal letter to the Moretti estate. It was addressed to Adrian, but mentioned Sarah Dawson by name. It claimed that the documents recovered from the chapel, the photographs, the letters, the newspaper clipping, were the legal property of a private collection belonging to a man named Counselor Dario Fenn, and demanded their return within 72 hours, or legal proceedings would begin. Adrian read the letter once, folded it carefully, and set it on his desk. "Who is Dario Fenn?" Emma asked. Adrian was quiet for a moment in the particular way that meant he was deciding how much to say. "His father was one of the men who organized the attack on my parents 28 years ago," he said. "Dario inherited everything, the money, the connections, and apparently the belief that certain things are better left buried." Emma stared at him. "He knew. This whole time, someone knew what my mother did and said nothing?" "Knowing and proving are different things," Adrian said. "As long as those documents stayed hidden, there was nothing to prove. Your mother had vanished. My father was dead. The whole story was just a gap in the record." He looked at the letter again. "But now the gap has a shape,
And that frightens him. "So what do we do?" Adrian picked up his phone. "We invite him to dinner." The gala was held at the Moretti estate in the main reception hall that Emma had not seen before. A long, high-ceilinged room with dark wood paneling and tall windows, and the kind of chandelier that existed purely to remind people where they stood. 50 guests, carefully chosen. A string quartet in the corner. Waiters moving with the quiet efficiency of people paid to be invisible. Emma wore a dress Adrian's assistant had sent to her apartment that morning with a note that said simply, "You'll need this." It was deep green, well cut, and fit her properly in a way that suggested someone had paid attention to her actual size rather than approximating. She had stood in front of her mirror for a long moment before leaving. She arrived to find Adrian already in the room, moving between guests with the ease of a man completely at home in his own controlled environment. He caught her eye across the room when she entered and gave a single small nod that meant, "You're here. Good. Stay close." Dario Fenn arrived 40 minutes late. He was 60, broad in the manner of a man who had once been athletic and had since redirected his energy entirely into acquiring things. He had a politician's handshake and a politician's smile, wide, immediate, and connected to nothing behind the eyes. He worked the room for 20 minutes before Adrian intercepted him near the windows, smooth and unhurried, a glass of water in hand. Emma stayed close enough to hear. "Counselor Fenn," Adrian said warmly, "thank you for coming." "Adrian," Fenn's smile held. "Beautiful evening, though I suspect you didn't invite me for the food." "I invited you because I believe in resolving misunderstandings in person," Adrian said. "Your lawyer's letter suggested a misunderstanding." Fenn's smile tightened just slightly. "It wasn't a misunderstanding. Those documents belong to a private archive my family has maintained for decades. Their removal constitutes—" "The documents were found on Moretti land," Adrian said pleasantly, "in a Moretti chapel.
inside a box that was placed there by a woman your family spent 28 years trying to locate and silence. Something moved behind Fenn's eyes. Not guilt. Men like Fenn had long since made their peace with guilt, but the cold recalculation of someone reassessing a situation. "That's a serious accusation," Fenn said quietly. "It's a documented one," Adrian replied. He gestured toward a side table Emma hadn't paid attention to when she arrived. On it sat a leather folder, and beside the folder, an older man in a gray suit. A notary, Emma realized, recognizing the formal bearing, and beside him, a woman Emma recognized with a start as the city archivist she and Adrian had spoken to 2 days ago. Emma hadn't known Adrian had brought them here tonight. She watched Fenn's face process this. "Certified copies," Adrian continued, still pleasantly, "of the original documents registered with the city archive this week. Chain of custody established. Witnesses present." He tilted his head. "Your lawyer is welcome to proceed, of course, but I'd encourage you to consider what a court case would surface. Specifically, your father's financial connection to the men who organized an attempt on my family. That particular document is also in the archive now." The string quartet shifted into something gentle and unrelated. Fenn said nothing for a long moment. Around them, guests laughed and clinked glasses and remained entirely unaware. Then Fenn smiled, a smaller, different smile than the one he'd arrived with, the smile of a man recalculating entirely. "It seems," he said, "that I've been misinformed about the nature of these documents." "It seems so," Adrian agreed. Fenn excused himself. He was gone within 10 minutes, his car leaving the estate quietly, without fanfare. Emma stepped up beside Adrian.
"You planned all of that before he even walked in," she said. "I planned it the morning I got the letter," he said. Emma looked at him sideways. "You're a little frightening, you know." Adrian considered this seriously. "Only to people who deserve it," he said. "And despite everything, despite the weight of the week, the secrets, the history pressing in from all sides," Emma laughed. It surprised them both. Sarah didn't want to come. Emma had expected resistance, but not the particular kind she got. Not fear this time, not the hard-eyed deflection from the bakery. This was quieter than that. Her mother sat at the kitchen table with both hands around a cup of tea and said simply, "I don't belong in a place like that." "You've been saying that your whole life," Emma said. "About every place." Sarah looked up. "You made yourself small on purpose," Emma continued. "I understand why now, I do. But Mama, the reason you had to stay small is gone. Fenn has nothing. The documents are registered. Adrian's legal team buried every thread those people could pull." She sat down across from her mother. "You don't have to hide anymore." Sarah looked at her tea. "It's not about hiding," she said quietly. "It's about... I didn't do what I did to be rewarded for it. Going there, accepting whatever he wants to give, feels like changing the reason." Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Adrian's father wrote in his diary that he wanted to protect your family the way he'd protect his own. That's not a reward, Mama. That's a man trying to repay a debt before he ran out of time. He didn't make it." She paused. "His son is trying to finish what he started. Are you really going to tell me that's wrong?" Sarah said nothing for a long time. Outside, a neighbor's radio played something with too much bass. The refrigerator hummed. The ordinary sounds of a life kept deliberately ordinary. "What do I wear?" Sarah finally said. Emma smiled. "I'll handle it." The gathering was private, nothing like the gala. No string quartet, no 50 guests, no architecture of strategy. Just the immediate family. Adrian's grandmother,
his younger brother Marco, who had driven up from the south and had his father's serious eyes and his mother's easier smile, and Gio, who was apparently family enough to stand in the garden and pretend he wasn't emotional. Emma brought Sarah through the front door at 4 in the afternoon, when the light through the estate windows was amber and long. Sarah walked in slowly, taking in the hallway, the high ceilings, the framed photographs on the walls. And then she stopped at one. An old photograph. A young couple standing at the edge of a field. The woman laughing. The man looking at her with the expression of someone who cannot quite believe his luck. "Alina," Sarah said softly. Then, looking at the man, "Roberto." She stood there for a moment. Emma didn't rush her. Adrian appeared from the corridor. No suit today, just a dark shirt, sleeves rolled, and he stopped when he saw Sarah standing before the photograph. He waited until she turned. When she did, they looked at each other for a long, measuring moment. Two people on either side of a 28-year gap, trying to find the bridge across it. "You have his eyes," Sarah said finally. "I couldn't see it at the hotel, but here—" She stopped. "Everyone says that," Adrian said. "He would have been glad to hear you noticed." Sarah made a small sound that was almost a laugh and didn't quite make it. Adrian's grandmother appeared from the sitting room. She moved slowly but with great intention, the way very old people move when they have decided that something matters. She was carrying a small wooden box, not the iron box from the chapel, something older than that, with brass fittings and a hinge that had been polished recently. She stopped in front of Sarah. The two women were the same height, Emma noticed.
And for just a moment, they simply looked at each other. A woman who had been saved and a woman who had done the saving, meeting properly for the first time across a distance measured not in miles, but in years. "I knew that night that you were someone particular," Adrian's grandmother said. "I saw you from the window, going back toward the house. I tried to tell Roberto, but by the time he understood, you were already gone." She opened the wooden box. Inside, resting on a fold of dark velvet, was a medallion. Bronze, circular, the size of a large coin. On one face, a phoenix. The same image as the tattoo, rendered in fine raised metalwork, wings spread mid-flight, the tail feathers curling into flame. "Roberto had this made the week after," the grandmother said. "He carried it every day, waiting to give it to you. When he died, he gave it to me and said, 'When she is found, give her this. Don't let them give her money. Give her this, and tell her it was always meant for her hands.'" Sarah looked at the medallion for a long moment without touching it. Then she reached out and picked it up. She held it in her palm, that flower-rough, capable, 28 years strong hand, and looked at the phoenix. And something in her face did what it hadn't done through all the questioning and the confessions and the confrontations. It simply let go. Emma had to look away. She found Adrian already looking at her, and she realized her cheeks were wet, which was embarrassing, and she didn't care at all. Adrian said nothing. He just reached over and handed her his pocket square without looking away from his grandmother and Sarah. Emma took it. "Thank you," Sarah said at last, her voice very quiet. Not to Adrian, not to the grandmother, to the medallion, to Roberto, to 28 years of a promise finally keeping itself. Marco broke the silence from the doorway, his voice deliberately light. "I was told there would be food at this thing." Everybody laughed, and the sound of it filled the old house like something that had been missing from it for a very long time. The community center was Emma's idea. She had mentioned it almost accidentally, 3 days after the gathering at the estate, sitting in Adrian's car outside her mother's bakery after dropping Sarah off. She had been looking at the street, the narrow, familiar street with its uneven pavement and the laundromat that was always too full,
and the small park where the benches needed repainting, and she had said, without planning to, "There are so many people around here who just need one solid thing to hold on to." Adrian had looked at where she was looking. "What kind of thing?" he asked. "A place," Emma said. "Somewhere that helps families get back on their feet. Job training, childcare support, basic legal advice. Nothing grand, just solid. The way my mother was solid for your parents when they had nothing else." Adrian was quiet for a moment. "Build it," he said. Emma turned to look at him. "Just like that?" "Just like that," he said. "I'll fund it. You run it. We name it after nobody. No plaques, no dedications. Just a place that works." Emma studied him for a long moment, this complicated, careful, quietly decent man who had walked into her life through a broken cartwheel and a cup of coffee and a tattoo on a wrist. "Why no dedication?" she asked. Adrian looked at the street. "Because your mother taught me that the best things are done without a name attached." Emma faced forward. "All right," she said. 6 weeks later, the building at the corner of Linden Street had clean windows and a new coat of paint the color of warm sand and a hand-lettered sign above the door that simply read, "The Center." The opening was not an event. There was no ribbon, no speech, no photographer. Adrian had been firm about that, and Emma had agreed, because the whole point was that this place belonged to the street it sat on, not to the people who built it. Sarah arrived first.
She stood outside for a moment, looking up at the sign, the morning light falling across her face and the bronze medallion she now wore every day on a simple chain. Then she pushed the door open and went inside. And that was that. By noon, the front room had 6 families in it. Emma moved between them, helping a young mother fill out a job application form, directing a teenager toward the bookshelf in the back corner that Adrian had stocked personally, explaining to an older man with worried eyes that the legal advisor came in every Tuesday and Thursday, and yes, it was free, genuinely free, no catch. She felt useful in a way that hotel corridors had never quite managed. Adrian came by in the late afternoon, unannounced. He stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the room, the noise of it, the realness of it, and Emma watched him from across the space and thought that he looked different here than he did anywhere else she had seen him. Lighter, somehow. Less like a man managing things, and more like a man simply present. He helped a small boy retrieve a ball that had rolled behind a filing cabinet. Emma smiled. Later, when most of the families had gone and Sarah was in the back room organizing donated books with the focused pleasure of someone doing exactly what they should be doing, Emma and Adrian sat on the front steps in the cooling evening air. The street was winding down around them. A woman walked a dog. 2 boys argued cheerfully over a bicycle. Somewhere above them, a window was open and music drifted down. Something old and slightly out of tune, and entirely right for the moment. "He would have liked this," Adrian said. Emma knew he meant his father. "I think my mother would have liked him," she said. Adrian smiled, a real one, unhurried, the kind she had learned to wait for because it was always worth it. "She probably would have told him he was overdressed." Emma laughed. "She absolutely would have." A comfortable silence settled between them, the kind that didn't need filling. Adrian reached into his jacket and took out the leather diary, his father's diary, which he had been carrying with him every day since the chapel, the way you carry something you're not ready to put down yet. He held it for a moment, turning it over once. Then he looked at it one last time, at the cover worn smooth at the corners, at the weight of everything written inside it, and he held it out to Emma. She looked at him. "What are you doing?" "Finishing it," he said simply. Emma took the diary. She held it in both hands, feeling its weight. Inside its pages, a rescue, a refusal, a 28-year search,
A promise kept. Two families joined by a single act of nameless courage. A woman who had made herself invisible to keep love safe. A man who had spent his life looking for someone who was never looking to be found. And here, on a painted step outside a center on Linden Street, something new beginning quietly, the way the best things do. Emma looked at Adrian. He was already looking at her, steady and certain, the way he was with everything that mattered to him. "You know," she said softly, "none of this started with you or me." "No," he agreed. "It started with a woman who chose to go back," Emma said. Adrian nodded slowly. "And it ended," he said, "with everything she went back for." The street moved around them. The evening deepened. Sarah's laughter drifted out from inside, warm, unguarded, free. And for the first time in 28 years, nobody was hiding.